Because usually CIA handles preparing presidential briefings on Eastern Europe.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome. Welcome to this virtual and in-person service of the Idaho Falls Unitarian Universalist Church on this 6th day of April, 2025. Welcome to this place of peace. May we find some moments of quiet contemplation. Welcome to this place of celebration. May our hearts soar with gratitude for the gift of life. Welcome to this place of here. Welcome to this place of inquiry. Here, may we be challenged to open our minds and hearts ever wider. Come into this place of community. May we together draw the circle of love and justice ever wider. Welcome to this sacred place. Come, let us worship, celebrate, grieve, and love together. If you're watching online, please sign into the chat box so that we may know who is attending, and you can put your joys and concerns into the chat box. I'm Ron Golan, and I will be assisting Reverend Kevin Carson in the service this morning. And there are a few announcements, several announcements. I guess I better read this one first. The Philosophical Society will be showing the movie, and I can't pronounce it, Gattaca. And then discussing its philosophical implications on Friday.
Louder. We can't hear you.
You can? I can hear me. Sorry. Is that a little better? Too much? The Philosophical Society will be showing the movie Gattaca and then discussing its philosophical implications on Friday, April 18th at 5:30. It is recommended that you bring a sandwich to keep up your strength. The Blue Bunch Book Club will be meeting on the 17th, and there's more information about that over on the table. Next Sunday will be second Sunday potluck, so keep that in mind. The care team could use more members, so if you're interested at all in helping out in many different ways, please consider that. The other thing I have here is please silence your cell phone. And if you have joys and concerns, please write them on the slip of paper back in the back there. Are there any other announcements? Okay. In that case, it is time for the community reading.
Hi, my name's Kat.
Cat R.
Good, how you this morning?
Civilized now. And takes the lawn and renew it. Looks like it's stinking my lawn.
How you doing this morning? I'm very
Where do I? They're actually redoing the fence.
The good, right over here.
And they're also doing kids' fences. Unfortunately, somebody took it off as my client.
Marianne can do that. She just shut it off. She has a one minute. And I can do that for about a week. And I gotta go back.
Yeah, I'm afraid I do it to myself. Every
Oh,
night
yeah?
before I try to go to bed, I read the bad news and I just lay there.
Just grind on it all night.
And one more announcement. One more announcement. Be sure to think about staying for coffee after the service. Anyway. Now let us prepare ourselves for worship. Calm our hearts, our minds, our breathing. Breathe deeply in and out, listening to your breath as I ring the peace bowl 3 times. Our church's covenant helps us remember why we are a part of this faith and why we give our time and resources to this congregation. If you so choose, please recite along with me the covenant that this congregation has chosen to live by. Love is the spirit of this community, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. The chalice lighting is accompanied by the words from Christine Robinson. We gather this hour as people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Our call to worship this morning is the poem The Gardener by Mary Oliver. Have I lived enough? Have I loved enough? Have I considered right action enough? Have I come to any conclusion? Have I experienced happiness with sufficient gratitude? Have I endured loneliness with grace? I say this, or perhaps I'm just thinking it. Actually, I probably think too much. Then I step out into the garden, where the gardener, who is said to be a simple man, is tending his children, the roses. I invite you now to rise in body or spirit and join in singing our opening hymn, number 1, May Nothing Evil Cross This Door. Well, normally, my wife Marty does our Time for All Ages, but as many of you know, she was in a car accident Tuesday, and she's not seriously hurt, but she is very sore and very bruised, and has raccoon eyes right now from hitting her head on the post. Car is a mess, but she is thankfully well. She should be back in a couple of weeks. I want to let her have time to rest and recuperate. So, Kat Reese will be leading the children, there you are, after we sing the children out. Not sure, are there any children here today? Yeah. Okay. So if you want to stay, you can, and unless the children come in the last minute. But our Time for All Ages story this morning is the legend of the three sisters, and this is a Cherokee version of the story. Once upon a time, there were three sisters. The first sister was very tall and strong. Her name was Corn Girl, and she wore a pale green dress and had long yellow hair that blew in the wind. Corn Girl liked to stand straight and tall, but the longer Corn Girl stood in her field, the hungrier she got. And every day more weeds were growing up around her feet and choking her. The second girl, sister, was very thin and quick and fast, and her name was Bean Girl. But she wasn't very strong. She couldn't even stand up on her own. She was good at making food, but she just had to lie there, stretched out on the ground, and she would get dirty and wet, which wasn't good for her. The weeds bothered her too, because she was not strong enough to keep them away. The third sister, Squash Girl, was short and strong. She liked to wander along the ground. She wore a yellow dress. She was stronger than the weeds, and so they did not bother her. But the strong sun scorched her leaves. She was hungry too. For a long time, the sisters didn't get along. They each wanted to be independent and free and not have anything to do with the other two. So, Corn Girl stood there with her feet hurting and got hungrier and hungrier. And Bean Girl lay there on the ground, fighting the weeds without success, and just got dirtier and wetter. And the little sister Squash Girl was hot and hungry too. So Bean Girl talked to her sister Corn Girl and said, "What if I feed you some good food? And you could hold me up so I don't have to lie on the ground and get all dirty." And Corn Girl thought that was a great idea. Then little Squash Girl called up to her tall sister, "How about if I lie on your feet and protect them from the weeds?" Corn Girl thought that was a great idea too. Bean Girl needed protection from the weeds too, and so she offered to give Squash Girl food in return for weed protection. Both Corn and Bean Girls promised to shade Squash Girl's leaves from the hot sun. So the three sisters learned to work together so that everyone would be healthier and happier. Corn Girl helped Bean Girl stand up. Bean Girl fed Corn Girl and Squash Girl good food. And Squash Girl protected her two sisters from the weeds from growing up around them all. And that's why the people planted their corn, their beans, and their squash together in the same field, the three sisters. Some people also grew sunflowers nearby. Sunflower was sometimes called the fourth sister. Her large, pretty flowers attracted bees and butterflies to pollinate the smaller flowers of the three sisters and made them more productive together. The sunflower also gave away her nutritious seeds to the birds, the animals, and most importantly, to the people who knew to grow her next to the three sisters. Seeing no children sing out, we'll proceed to our joys and concerns.
As I read the joys and concerns, Reverend Kevin will light a candle for each one. From Chase, a joy. Passed a hard welding test. Congratulations. From Cat Reese, a joy. Glad for warm weather. Happy for the protests all over the United States. From Molly, a joy. Went to the great hands-off protest. Over 500 people showed up. Fantastic. So Martha Crow, a concern. My sister Helen is in the hospital due to AFibs. Hope all will come out well for her. We do too. From Jared, a joy. I'm grateful for the community that supports me. Right. From Vic Allen, my eldest brother George, who is 72, had a stroke last Friday. Family members tell me my brother is gone, but things look better for his long-term physical recovery. I hope so. From Karen Schaefer, a joy. Wonderful week with 2 sons and grandson, all at Alaska, Anchorage, Alaska. Lovely views. Lots of lovely views up there.
Skiing, I forgot to put the word in, skiing.
Okay. From Cindy and Rob, a sorrow. We are mourning the loss of Bandit, the border collie, 2011 to 225. Are there any joys and concerns? We'll light one additional candle for those joys and concerns we hold in our hearts.
I have 2 short readings this morning. The first comes from the book Consolations, the Solace, Nourishment, and Underlying Meaning of Everyday Wants by David White, Everyday Words by David White. A deep experience of rest is the template of perfection in the human imagination, a perspective from which we are able to perceive the outer specific forms of our work and our relationships, whilst being nourished by the shared foundational gift of the breath itself. From this perspective, we can be rested while putting together an elaborate meal for an arriving crowd, whilst climbing the highest mountain or sitting at home surrounded by the chaos of a loving family. Rested, we are ready for the world, but not held hostage by it. Rested, we care again for the right things and the right people in the right way. In rest, we reestablish the goals that make us more generous, more courageous, more of an invitation. Someone we want to remember and someone others would want to remember too. And from our second reading is from the book Nature and the Human Soul, Cultivating Wholeness and Community in a Fragmented World by Bill Plotkin. Of all the possible ways to identify what we mean by soul, I prefer ultimate place because it extracts us from the troubling and messy implication that the soul is something material or just as unworkable, that it is something private, inner, invisible, ethereal, or celestial. The soul of the thing, though certainly not a tangible object, is nevertheless, and in principle, publicly observable in the same sense that a love affair is observable, and usually not inner, invisible, or ethereal. Or in the same way, a theatrical performance, a touchdown, a faux pas, an embarrassment, or a victory is observable. We wouldn't say that any of these things was merely a physical object or an inner event. And yet, we have no doubt about their existence and their significance to us. When you know a mature person well enough, someone who has consciously uncovered her soul to some degree and is consciously living it, you can see her doing it right here on earth. Her soul is not inner, invisible, or private. My reason for wanting to rescue soul from the material and the ethereal is that both these notions about the soul buy into the profoundly unfortunate and unnecessary Cartesian split between inner and outer, between mind and matter. Material reduces psychology to neurology, and ethereal might as well be unreal. An offering to support the mission of this church will now be given and gratefully received. decided on my topic for today's sermon several days ago about prayer as a spiritual practice when we are feeling overwhelmed by the world, I was thinking about all the political and financial turmoil we are witnessing in America and abroad, as well as natural disasters like earthquakes and tornadoes, and the personal challenges that everyone faces, such as serious illness and grief. As fate would have it, my wife Marty was in a car accident Tuesday that left our car totaled and her bruised and sore, but thankfully not seriously injured. So I was handed a fresh lesson in unexpected turmoil to test my proposition. I was also thinking about how the subject of prayer has come up in several conversations I've had in recent weeks, including in our most recent forum service, and how prayer can be a tricky subject for many Unitarian Universalists. Some of us believe in the power of so-called petitionary prayers to God or some other force in the universe, the kind of prayers that appeal for something to be granted through divine intervention, if it pleases the Almighty. But most Unitarian Universalists these days do not. Except perhaps for more traditional Christian and Jewish members of our faith, the idea of praying for something to happen seems at best wishful thinking, and for the more skeptical, a waste of time. But there are other kinds of prayer, and most Unitarian Universalists would agree that some form of meditation or contemplation can be beneficial regardless of our theological beliefs. Numerous studies have also confirmed that there are indeed physical and psychological benefits associated with such practices. So I suggest that whether we call it prayer, meditation, or something else, and no matter what we believe about the nature of such practices, or to whom or what our prayerful thoughts may be addressed, a healthier inner life can result from some kind of prayer. And it can prepare us for dealing with the onslaught of life's challenges. But given the overly busy lives that so many of us lead, it can be hard to make time for regular prayer or meditation. Back when we lived in Rhode Island and I was working for Hasbro, I would often find myself praying while driving to work in the morning. And this is sometimes the case even driving around Idaho today. The reason had nothing to do with the perils of driving in Rhode Island, which was admittedly a frightening ordeal, but what it meant was that I was neglecting to dedicate the time in my daily schedule for even a few quiet minutes of genuine meditation. Driving alone provides a quiet opportunity. I usually try to pray every morning with a focus on gratitude as a way of orienting myself to the new day with a positive, mindful attitude. And in warm weather, I like to do this outside if possible. And like most spiritual practices, consistency helps deepen and refine the effectiveness of our efforts. Beginning the day with gratitude can be very tough when I find myself struggling to hold back the tears of grief or despair for the world. But these are the times when it is most important. And God knows there have been plenty of such days lately. But when my daily routine is so rushed that I am praying behind the wheel, it is a warning sign that I really need to slow down, step back, and make more time for stillness and solitude. I may have more time available since I became a full-time minister, but it is far too easy for any of us to neglect our inner selves due to the distractions of modern living. Even the desire to do good in the world can become overly time-consuming. And sometimes it is best to prioritize and say no. Ministers and people in similar professions dedicated to serving others are notoriously bad at being willing to throttle back when we should. But these days, this seems to apply to almost everybody. I'm not saying that we need to tune out the urgency of the moment altogether. There is plenty we should be upset about in the world, but we need to find a way to slow down and tend to the garden of our soul if we are to be effective in the long run. Otherwise, we will probably burn out and lose hope, or maybe it will be harmful to our health. But what exactly is this soul that needs tending? The word soul is one of those vague spiritual terms we throw around as if everyone understood what it meant. And it is made worse by the way soul is used in many non-spiritual contexts. You hear people talk about the soul of the nation, or that poor soul, or that music really stirs my soul. But in spiritual or theological terms, what does soul mean? Historically, the Christian ancestors of our Unitarian Universalist tradition worried a great deal about the salvation of their souls, based on the belief that it was the immortal spirit half of our dual natures, children of God. That when we die, our souls leave our material bodies behind and enter either into heavenly bliss, or perhaps some period of punishment, or even eternal damnation. It was a very big deal for them, and it still is for many people. Wars have even been fought over the idea of who had the correct understanding of how all of this worked. In the Eastern religious traditions, there's a similar concept of an immortal soul. For example, the so-called indwelling self of the Hindu tradition. When you combine this concept of the soul with the idea of karma and the belief that each soul is reborn into multiple cycles of reincarnation, how one has lived in the current lifetime has implications for your status in the next. But despite the appealing idea that death was only a doorway to the next rebirth, the thought of endless cycles of rebirth presents its own existential challenges about the meaning of life. Are we really stuck in endless cycles of rebirth with all the suffering and sorrow that comes with each new life? If so, it seems rather pointless. A solution to this dilemma came from the Buddha, who presented the innovative idea that one could eventually reach enlightenment and find peace, escaping these endless rebirths. And this idea became codified in the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism. And these are just a couple of examples of how humanity has imagined this idea of the soul. You can see something similar in almost every culture throughout history. Life and death have always been with us, of course. We can observe the beginnings of life with the first breath taken by a newborn, and the moment of death comes when we breathe no more. For any observer, it seems obvious that something is present in our living bodies that allows us to be alive, and that when we die, that something leaves us in some mysterious way. We know a lot more about the science of life these days, but the transitions of birth and death are still full of sacred mystery. There are other ways of imagining the soul, though, as Bill Plotkin described in the reading this morning. He uses the metaphor of the soul as being the ultimate place that each of us occupies in the universe. That special niche that uniquely distinguishes our individual being within the interdependent web of life. In an earlier book, Plotkin described the soul a little differently, but in a similar way, as the vital, mysterious, and wild core of our individual selves, an essence unique to each person, qualities found in layers of the self much deeper than our personalities. He goes on to distinguish the soul from the ego, which he suggests is an outward-facing part of our being, which interacts with the world. The soul, for Plotkin, lies deeper, or is best described metaphorically, though it is not less real than our ego. But as you can see, we're still tripping over language, whenever we try to describe this elusive soul. As modern theologically diverse folks, we may find that one or none of these concepts of soul have meaning for us. I believe, though, that we still have an intuitive feeling that there is something vital and alive deep within each of us that is more than simply being a living organism. So for the sake of continuing my sermon, I ask you to accept that each of us has a soul in some form that works for you, even if it is merely a metaphor. How the soul relates to the divine or sacred mystery or God, or whatever you want to call it, is the next question. It is common to hear the term spirit when this question is discussed, whether it is the Holy Spirit of the Jewish and Christian traditions or something less theologically defined. Plotkin, for instance, describes spirit as the single great and eternal mystery that permeates and animates everything in the universe, and yet transcends all. And he envisions each soul as an agent or spirit. I believe that a Taoist might agree. And a transcendentalist like Ralph Waldo Emerson would also be okay with such a definition, since it sounds a lot like his concept of the oversoul. I find this concept of spirit generally works for me as well. But here again, the language is necessarily fuzzy and speaks of mystery. Even among those religious traditions that believe they're certain about their claim to the truth, there are typically dissenting opinions among the mystical fringes that point out the folly of such thinking. Soul and spirit remain elusive. By the 16th century, a long list of Christian mystics had spent considerable time wrestling with the concept of the soul and spiritual development. Among the most famous thinkers in this realm was the Spanish nun Teresa of Ávila, who lived between 1515 and 1582, and her protege, the Carmelite friar and priest known as John of the Cross, who lived between 1542 and 1591. Teresa was a very popular figure among the common people, and she was quickly canonized as Saint Teresa by the Roman Catholic Church in 1622. Known for her ecstatic visions, she was the subject of the magnificent sculpture by Bernini called The Ecstasy of Saint Teresa of Ávila, completed in 1653, which is located in the Santa Maria della Vittoria Church in Rome. You may recall that the sculpture was featured in the plot of Dan Brown's novel and subsequent movie, Angels and Demons. Both Teresa and John wrote extensively about spirituality, and they are most often associated with the idea of the dark night of the soul. While the complexities of the dark night are a topic for a different sermon, let me just say that generally it describes a time of spiritual crisis in your journey toward union with the sacred, in which all your basic assumptions and beliefs seem to have abandoned you. It is a moment of crisis, but it is also one filled with potential. Today, though, I want to focus on what Teresa said about nurturing one's soul through a variety of prayer practices. And please note that though her language and theology were understandably Christian, if you're more familiar with an Eastern contemplative practice, you will probably recognize a lot of similarities. And I would suggest translating these into ideas that is in a form that works for you. Practices like these are internal work that transcends any theology or single tradition, and I would argue that they are more psychological than theological. Even the most skeptical humanist can benefit from mindfulness or some other form of contemplative practice as a means of reducing stress and coping with despair. And in the secular world, many companies are now offering mindfulness meditation classes for their employees, recognizing the practical benefit of such practices on worker productivity. In her first book, titled Life, written several years before she met John on the cross, Teresa imagined the human soul not as something a person has, but as who a person is at the deepest core of one's being. She used the metaphor of the soul as a garden, where the flowers are the virtues planted there for us by God, who dwells in the center of the garden. Since we are creatures made in the image of God, the tilling and planting of the garden has already been done for us, and we need only water the garden through our spiritual practices to make it bloom and thrive. The water in her metaphor was prayer, which she described as existing in 4 grados, or grades, beginning with meditation. Each grade involved a more active use of the faculties, proceeding through deeper and deeper layers of contemplation. The modern spiritual writer Gerald May described her teachings very nicely in one of his books, so let me paraphrase the way he described Teresa's 4 grades of prayer. The first grade of prayer, meditating on a passage of Scripture, or perhaps something about the life of Jesus, is like drawing water from a well and carrying it to water our interior garden. It is an active form of spiritual practice that can open us to God and bring us moments of powerful gratitude or beauty, which Teresa called contentos. The problem with such a practice is that, like fetching water from a well, it can be tiring after a while, and we may endure long periods without realizing any of those contentos that bring us joy. Part of our discontent, she said, comes from the feeling that we are doing all the work, when in reality, she believed that we could do nothing without God's grace. This introduces the second grade of prayer, which she called the prayer of quiet. It is the first taste of the contemplative experience, and the contemporary practice known as centering prayer is a good example of the quiet prayer she described. If you aren't familiar with centering prayer, it is the practice of sitting in silence and trying to still the mind, lightly returning to the thought of a sacred word such as peace whenever we find our internal chatter acting up. Usually this is done for periods of about 20 minutes to allow the mind enough time to quiet down. It is an ancient monastic practice that has seen a revival among many Christians in recent decades, thanks to the work of the late Father Thomas Keating, who was a Trappist monk from St. Joseph's Abbey in Massachusetts. During contemplation, we may experience moments of what she called gustos, which we might call flashes of insight. She believed that contentos arise from within us and are directed toward God, but gustos arise from God and are directed toward us. In her garden watering metaphor, this state of prayer is compared to a water wheel that we simply crank slowly, as it does the real work of moving the water. As they teach in centering prayer, it is important to relinquish any expectations that we will experience moments of insight, but instead allow them to arise as they may or may not. Our third way of prayer is compared to an adjacent spring or stream that provides water from the garden, soaking its roots and requiring very little effort from us. Perhaps we dip our bucket once in a while to make sure a few flowers are really nourished. But our point was that now we acknowledge God is doing almost everything within us. And this may bring us many experiences of the gustos of feeling the divine presence. Eventually, with ongoing practice and the grace of God, as she would say, we may enter the fourth way of prayer, in which we intuitively understand our inseparability from the sacred. She called it the prayer of union, which is likened to rainfall watering the soul's garden. In such deep contemplative practice, we may experience moments of profound spiritual unity, but they are usually very fleeting for even the most dedicated contemplatives among us. Even for Teresa, she reported that such moments rarely lasted for more than a few minutes. She wrote that she could not remember one lasting more than half an hour during her entire lifetime. So those are the 4 grades of prayer in the spiritual practice system developed by Teresa of Ávila. And maybe you are now eager to head to some quiet spot and begin praying. What I think is important about these practices is they acknowledge the need for passivity. Tending the garden of the soul may sound like an active practice at first glance. But as Teresa explained, beyond the effort to carve out some time and space for quiet practice, the deeper one enters into contemplative practice, the more we are called into passivity and relinquishing our thoughts. It is a journey of increasing unity with what I call the sacred mystery. And by its nature, it requires a certain degree of dissolution of the individuated sense of self. This can be very hard, especially when we don't allow ourselves adequate rest or quiet time. We are also so used to being individual selves that we may even fear letting go even for a moment. It is so much easier to fill in all the gaps in our busy schedules with the noise of daily life, with our turbulent world as a backdrop. But I don't think that's what nature intended for us. We can do much more good for ourselves and for the world by stepping back from time to time. As David White wrote in the reading, rested, we are ready for the world, but not held hostage by it. I'm reminded of my favorite haiku from the poet Matsuo Basho, who wrote, "Sitting quietly, doing nothing, spring comes and the grass grows by itself." Let me say that again. Sitting quietly, doing nothing, spring comes and the grass grows by itself. How many of us take time to sit quietly and do nothing? In life's darkest moments, when the world around us is filled with chaos and turmoil, and we feel overwhelmed, it is critical that we find ways to bolster our physical, mental, and spiritual resilience. Spring is a good time to try something fresh and new, and tending the garden of our soul seems like a good metaphor for exploring a new spiritual practice. Just having warmer weather to get outside and watch the earth come alive fills me with some of those contentos that Teresa described. So in the weeks to come, as the flowers bloom and the grass grows by itself, I'm imploring you to tend to your inner garden. Maybe even pray with the fervor of Teresa of Ávila. Then let the Spirit of life flow through you and pour out like rain upon the world. I invite you to rise in body or spirit once again and join in singing your closing hymn, number 209, "O Come, You Longing, Thirsty Souls."
From the spring, and come you
Breathing is a Prayer by Wendell Berry. Sit and be still until in the time of no rain you hear beneath the dry wind's commotion in the trees the sound of flowing water among the rocks, a stream unheard before, and you are aware breathing is prayer.
Please join with me in reading the words for extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These enjoy in our hearts until we are together again.
Unitarian custom of coffee hour.
Well, I mean, it goes way back through the ages, so participate in this little custom.
Did you go to First Church in Salt Lake?
And it is a sacrament.